Welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. And today I am so honored to sit down with someone whose work has been a guiding light for many of us navigating the conversations about race, about power and identity. This welcoming that I'm doing is with Tony Nabors, and a lot of you follow him. A lot of you have heard of him. He has over 20, this is crazy. He has over 20 years of experience in racial equity consulting, education, and community advocacy. He's dedicated his career to helping people understand the systems of oppression and how they operate within our personal and our professional spaces. His approach isn't just intellectual, it's deeply heart-centered. And I think this is why so many of us connect with Tony, because he offers both validation and a much appreciated ability to articulate what many of us feel, but sometimes struggle to express or know how to express. Through his work, he not only holds space for those of us pushing against systemic barriers, but also calls in those who are willing to do the work of unlearning. Today, I'm so excited to get into his journey. I'm excited to learn what lessons he's learned along the way, the practical ways we can dismantle this oppressive state many of us are in with these systems, not just in the professional world, but in our personal relationships too. There's quite a parallel process. And hopefully some of these conversations and things that we're going to learn really ultimately are here to help us dismantle a lot of that and start to rebuild the relationships that aren't going so well in the workplace, as well as in our homes and our community. And honestly, this is for any of us that have felt unseen, those of us that are often gaslit with all of those spiraling conversations that come back. And then those of us that are just simply tired of being the one to carry the weight of racial conversations. We're thinking about you. We hope that you can get something from this. So let's get into it. Welcome, Tony. How are we doing today?
We are doing great. Thank you for having me, Kieran. Definitely excited for the conversation.
You know, I just want to point out a few weeks ago, you and I had a consult, and I know I said this to you afterwards, but it felt like a 2 hour, it was supposed to be like a 40-minute conversation, ended up being almost 2 hours. You gave me so much of your time, and it felt like a therapy session. I just feel I'm learning that when people of color are in the safe space with other people of color, where we can ask, share, make sense of like the day-to-day damage we feel in our workplaces and with our colleagues, with our friends, with our partners. So much healing happens when that space is given. And I am so appreciative of that time that you offered. You sat down and, you know, you've been doing this forever. And some of us are just late to the party and just waking up, just getting there. And so this is like a huge thank you. And it's the timing is weird or great or however we want to say it. My sister, who is going through her own journey, is here in town visiting, and we both were talking about like how cool is it that I get to sit down with you. And I started following you, she started following you. We didn't really talk about this. And so when I told her I had this consult, we talked a lot about, and she also told me how you were the first one that opened the door for her to understand what safety actually means in these conversations, because it's very rare that it's experienced. And she wanted to, you know, send a huge thank you as well today. She won't come on and say thank you, but that's her thing. But she wanted to make sure that you heard that you helped her sort of like get, you know, the beginning stages, which is like the hard part of this journey that we're on with unlearning, learning, all that stuff that we talk about. So thank you for that.
Thank you for telling me that. It's very humbling to hear. I really appreciate that. Please send my love to your sister.
I will tell her. Maybe she's hearing something around here. So Serena, we love you. Okay.
So shout out.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into it with you because I have so many things I want to talk to you about. But first, I want to know a little bit about your story. So maybe you can tell us about the spaces you grew up in and how those like spaces shaped your understanding of race and identity.
So I feel like my upbringing was pretty unusual. So I grew up in Washington State in the US, which is not known for being diverse. Like it's a pretty white state, but there's a specific corridor of I-5 that has some of the most diverse cities in the United States. And so I grew up in a town called Tacoma, that was very diverse. So all the way K through 12, basically, I had a lot of diversity in my community at school and a bunch of friends of different backgrounds and that kind of thing. So I just already had just a comfort with people from different backgrounds and stories and languages and that kind of thing. But, just living life, kid like anybody else, trying to figure everything out, trying to figure out where I might fit in. And then the balance between being in advanced courses that tended to be a lot more white, but then also I was an athlete, which tended to be a lot more diverse. And so just being in a lot of different spaces and then doing a lot of, kid chameleoning, because you want to fit in to some degree when you're a kid and kind of changing how I might talk and engage in different spaces. But then when I went to college, I went to University of Washington in Seattle, and I stumbled on this program called American Ethnic Studies, which is basically anti-racism, the undergraduate program. And this was in the early 2000s. So I don't think DEI necessarily had even been christened as a thing. I definitely wasn't familiar with that as a phrase back then. But I just was so surprised to learn all this history that I had never learned, even in these advanced level courses in high school. All these ways where my lived experience came into contact with US history in ways that I just never was aware of. And suddenly I had language for things that I'm experiencing, things that have felt uncomfortable, things that have been frustrating, things where I lacked interest in certain academic spaces because, again, I didn't see myself reflected. So I can memorize these things for the test, ace the test, and then I'm forgetting it because it doesn't feel like it's connecting. So that was my first really big, and this was just stumbling into courses and then realizing, whoa, this is massive. I don't know what I'm going to do with this as a major, but I know that I need for this information to be somehow connecting with whatever I do for the rest of my life. So then I had several different spaces, either in a specific career where I was actively doing education, teaching, mentoring around anti-racism to some degree, or I was working regular type corporate jobs and just being engaged in community. And then eventually I realized that I have enough expertise and experience and passion that I need to make this a lot more centrally focused in my life. And that's when I started the business, which was part-time until it was stable enough to do it full-time. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of the journey.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple minutes ago some of this like realization, maybe even it's validation of like, oh, these are things that maybe I was experiencing along the way, but I didn't quite know. And I can relate to this. That's kind of what I said with my sister too, is we're in our 40s, just sort of realizing some of these things too. And for you, was there like a defining moment or a lesson learned when you're like, holy crap, this is something that, it's like that gut we always say is telling us along the way all these years, but some of us don't access it for various reasons. And then when we become attuned to our gut or that intuition, we're like, holy crap. And you had mentioned this in the consult. It's like, once we know, we can't go back. And so when you knew or figured out, oh, wait a minute, I'm connected to a lot of this, my experiences are valid. Can you share a little bit about that defining moment or what that was like for you? And was it lonely? Was it isolating? Was it more rich? Was it inviting?
Yeah, so it was really exciting, to tell the truth, because again, I had the unusual experience of growing up with so much diversity. So, because I know anywhere that's just not the case for probably most people in the world. So I think it definitely felt very validating. It felt very empowering. It felt very exciting, to the point where I had been thinking through, you're figuring out your major in college. And, I was thinking maybe I want to do computer science. I love technology. Maybe I want to do something in the medical something. Maybe I want to do something in business. Like all these things, because I was academically successful my entire life. So I figured I'm going to pursue something in college that's going to be known to make a whole bunch of money. So it's very surprising that captured me so strongly, that is what I decided I wanted to be the foundation of my academic background that I bring into whatever the professional world space is. So then I also had the unusual experience of having an undergraduate program that also was really diverse. So I had community. And so we're filling each other. And I'm having classes that are maybe generally about American ethnic studies. And then I'm learning even specific groups. Like I'm in an indigenous studies class. I'm in an Asian American studies class. I'm in a Chicano studies class, like just various groups that I'm able to get a little bit more specific information about. And then even taking something like an elective class called American Pop Song, which is just about pop American music. And then the whole theme of that class was basically all American music comes from Black people. Like that's basically the summary of the class. And that wasn't even an ethnic studies class. So just all these ways of seeing the erasure of Black people, my community specifically throughout history, and then being able to connect it to the erasure of so many other communities that are not just, hey, it's fun and exciting that they did these things to build the US, but that these groups were essential to building the US. And then it's just an injustice that we don't hear these stories unless we take very specialized classes.
Totally.
So I think I was just so captured by that it was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with this information, but I need for that to be what I take with me into the world. Yeah. So I just felt very excited about it. And then that just sort of, it almost felt like a calling.
Yeah.
Like, again, I don't know what I'm doing with this, but this is what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to lock into this program.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that when you talk about the unusual experience, it makes a little more sense to me because I would think that the unusual would be what I'm unpacking and experiencing, but really I'm the majority, which is the isolation, the lack of validation, and the lived experiences. And for even my sister, we grew up and we fell hard into assimilation. And when your own household is struggling and trying to figure itself out, my parents are the survivors and they're immigrants and they're trying to learn. And sometimes it's like that textbook of the kid that doesn't belong and then goes and finds the gangs. And our gang was white people and we assimilated hard. And
that's a great analogy.
Now I'm trying to go through withdrawal and be like, I don't need the drugs. I don't need that gang. And the sad thing is, though, I'm married to a white man. My in-laws are white. My kids are half white. All of my close friends, my colleagues where I've worked, all of this stuff has influenced me. And a lot of people that message me in the background and are like, oh my God, me too. This is so me. But I don't know how to walk away from that. I don't know how to unlock that because then I'm going to lose these hard ass connections. And that's sort of what I've been unraveling on this end is that how come these people that are the closest to me, these best friends and these colleagues and even my partner, but there's such a disconnect in being able to understand, the journey that now I'm on. And so often I'll get well, you're the one that used to say this. You're the one that used to do that. And my question, which I'm getting to, is you said something that has not left me in this consult, which was, there's a difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. And when it comes to racial equity, how can we unpack what is that difference? Because I think a lot of white people in my life are stuck in the intellectual side and they kind of avoid and they don't know that deeper emotional work. And so we're yelling at each other in two different languages sometimes it feels like, and neither one wants to sort of get a translator and learn. And so I'd love to learn from you, and maybe there's a way and a space I can find of how do I work through that head and heart knowledge, because often we get fed the head knowledge back.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of folks, and in my experience, a lot of well-meaning white folks in particular, who racial justice and equity is in alignment with their values. That there's some level of yes, this is important. This is something we should care about, etc. And there's even some people that, as you said, will do the work to learn, to educate themselves, to reading these books, watching these films, maybe following these people on social media and that kind of thing. But a lot of people, I don't think, are aware that they are essentially acquiring knowledge with the same type of energy that somebody might acquire like a car collection or a really fancy shoe collection, or they've got jewelry, like they sort of acquire information and that same type of energy.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, I've got this stuff. Check me out. I'm amazing because I have this knowledge. I know these things. I know the correct language. As a matter of fact, you said this thing that was politically incorrect. I can correct you to show that I know all this stuff. And so again, that is a very different energy than somebody who has internalized this stuff into their passion, into their heart, their care, their emotions. The person who understands and recognizes that a lot of these belief systems that lead to white supremacy, that lead to inequities, that it's like a fog that we breathe. And there's an inevitability that we are going to internalize some of these ideas because we see them repeated in so many different spaces, in the news, in movies, in our families, in school. What stories do we hear? What stories do we not hear? Who do we see as modeled as the heroes versus the villains? Who do we see modeled as authority figures, as the CEOs versus the workers, the employees, the lesser thans? And so all of that combines together to give every single one of us, regardless of your ethnic or racial background, a particular set of beliefs about who is worthy and who is not. And so a lot of people have a hard time doing that level of internal work and owning and naming that, yep, I've got some gross stuff that I've internalized because I've been breathing in this fog, same as everybody else. And how can I humbly do the work to recognize that that's my programming and that I need to bust my butt? Can we cuss on this podcast?
Fresh out of fucks right here. Middle fingers up. Yes, we can fucking cuss.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to bust our ass. We got to bust our ass to do this unlearning, unprogramming work, right? But a lot of people, there's a lot of ego and there's a lot of identity being connected to being seen as a good person.
Yes.
And so people will compartmentalize the idea that anything connected to racial inequity, injustice, bias, that's bad people stuff.
Yeah.
And since I'm a good person, I can't have anything to do with that stuff. And that's such a block to our actual learning work, not just internalizing facts and language, but where it actually transforms who we are and what we care about, and then how we engage with people that are the recipients and the victims and the people harmed by these oppressive systems. I think about my own work. Like, yes, I'm Black, and there's things that I experience that are oppressive because of racial oppression. And also, I am a cisgender heterosexual man. And so I need to be thoughtful and aware of ways that I benefit from patriarchy and from misogyny and from homophobia and transphobia. And so I better put my humility on. Otherwise, I'm going to be out here in the streets doing justice work, hurting marginalized people. So this level of humility and self-awareness and self-growth and acknowledgement, we all have to be willing to put that on if we're looking to actually be participants in making the world a better, safer, fairer place for everybody. But a lot of people, again, they don't want to do that work of owning and naming our shit that we all have to deal with.
Yeah. I think you say that so well, because I think this is where those intersectionalities come in. And we were having a conversation the other day with my brother, who's like 6'3", he's got the beard, he has a physical presence, and he was at the gym, and he and another woman were the only two people in the gym working out at that time. And it was very early in the morning. She was a white woman, and it seemed to him that once he was there, she, immediately left. And so he came home feeling quite discouraged, disheartened, because he's been raised by women and that's not the way. But his wife had a really good conversation, like, us being people of color and being able to say that's exactly what the intersectionality is. Like, you have to deal with the racist part, but now you get to also look at what it's like for a woman. And maybe she wasn't racist. Maybe she has had terrible experiences with men, which most of us women have, where there's a lot of fear. And so she's trying to protect herself. And so multiple things can happen at the same time. And to me, that was also a huge learning moment as well. When they shared that, I was like, thank you, because sometimes even for me on my journey, I will see the way that I see it. And I have to myself stop and realize, okay, like I'm again late to the party. I have a lot of guilt for being late to this party of understanding and unpacking, but I'm doing it. But also there are multiple things that can be at play here. Where I get stuck is when I'm trying to explain my shitty experience that I had at Marshall's the other day with a woman who was working there and held her breath while my sister and I were going to try on clothes. The heart, you're like, I just want to explain this. It's so only with white people, it's such a disconnect where you're trying to prove that this happened. And I wish I had a way or a magic wand or a way to help us kind of realize in these moments that, yes, it's not just race. There could be lots of other things going on, but can we sit here for a minute? Because the race piece gets always pushed away when racism is on the agenda. All of these other things start to take over. And I'm not very good and confident, and I don't rely on myself to know how to stick with that in the moment because I get fearful. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll just go on and talk about this other thing. So when there's all these other intersectionalities at play, what's your advice? Like, you must talk to the organizations about this, or in our personal life. Like, is there some advice or a way for all of us listening, or that thank you, the people that are still being part of this conversation right now, that we can say, okay, yes, these are multiple things. And do we prioritize? Like, how do we go ahead and have that conversation? Because my white friend's priority might be something else than mine. And now we're like not wanting to meet each other at this, intersectionality. So is there something that we could be doing?
My advice, and I'm going to be broader and then I'm going to get narrower. My advice is to prioritize the intersection that makes people the most uncomfortable. And I think when you can do that well, then you create a foundation to deal with all kinds of areas of oppression and unfairness. And it just so happens that race is almost always the intersection that makes people the most uncomfortable. And sometimes you'll hear people that will be silent about other areas of injustice and oppression, except for when they're telling you that you need to focus on that instead of race, which is always a huge, huge indicator. So my belief and my philosophy is that when we can effectively navigate racism well, then again, we set a platform to be able to effectively navigate misogyny and patriarchy as well, homophobia, ableism, ageism, all of the isms and the phobias. There's so many things that need to get dealt with. But yeah, it's always a red flag when people are shouting out oppressions that need to get dealt with as a response to saying, hey, we need to have a conversation about race. That's always a red flag. And it's actually really gross because these other areas are really, really important. And so for people to wield that as a silencing rod against people that say, hey, let's talk about race and racism, get into an autopilot of recognizing that as like, this is an example of talking about race, and then you're trying to silence that conversation. So I think that that's one thing for us to have the courage, and not just the courage, but even just the discernment to catch that, like, oh, I don't think I would have caught that before, but now I know that's a thing that people do. So now I can, help to, like, yes, that's important too. And yes, we need to talk about that. But I'm noticing that there's a discomfort that's happening right now as we're talking about race. And so I think that we need to choose to press through that discomfort and to stay on topic and to know that we're going to also, we also care about these other things too.
Right.
And one more thing I want to say too, really quick. I want to, if I may, I want to encourage you specifically, Karen, to not feel that guilt about feeling like you're late to the party, because all of that is by design. Like, we are not taught any of this shit that we should be taught. And it is very elusive unless you find yourself in, the quote unquote right place at the right time. You just happen to stumble upon information. Like, this was my experience. There was a lot of things that I just knew from just living, and certain things like, that felt weird. What was that about? But I had none of the background until I literally stumbled into this academic program in college. So just know that's by design. And as you said, very, very normal that we don't know a lot of this stuff. And especially if we're living in places where we're not represented very much. So it's by design. That's what happens. And then it definitely is like this uphill climb to say, hey, that's fucked up. And I'm choosing to actively press back on that.
I had to fight back the tears there. So thank you for saying that. I feel like my sister and I were talking about this just last night too, is you feel when you're just getting it, there is guilt. There's so much shame because, like I worked in a not-for-profit for 17, 18 years, and it's a very toxic, racist place. And the unpacking that I'm doing is my contribution to that. And then there's this anger in there because it's like, okay, every day, all day, I'm sitting there and unpacking my role and looking at names of my boss and of people on the resume and being like, no, that's too much of color. We can't hire them. Oh no, don't hire brown people because, there could only be one. We're not really good at doing this work, and all these sorts of things that all the white people around me, we're like, yeah. And so you're doing this unpacking, and even in friendship conversations, often all my friends will play devil's advocate, and many will hold my husband at the center of the conversation. Like, oh, I wonder what it's like for him. He's editing your work. Like he's right there and he has to go through this. And so you're like, yeah. So let's now think about that. And so in my head all day, my sister's like, we're just constantly giving ourselves shit. And so how come, then the anger comes, I was like, how come I can do that, but none of you are willing to do that? And so then it becomes, as I know, tit for tat. But I think the struggle is when they're pointing it back at us, or I think the hardest part is the pattern by being abandoned in these conversations with silence. And so you get left with a lot of head nodding and silence. And, the common one is like when they sit back and you're like, oh, okay, you've disengaged. And it feels like abandonment because now we're like quickly try to change this and make it comfortable and whatnot. And that angers me so much because I feel terrible that, again, I allowed it to happen or whatnot. And even my sister, like I said, when she talks, she's like, fuck, I'm in the same place too. And so is there advice for the ones that do go silent, and then for those of us that accept that silence in that conversation? Like, can we do this truly with white people without, getting past that abandonment or getting past that silence part?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to try to multitask because I want to find something that I'm going to shout out that's connected to this. So hopefully I can do this multitask well and not be too distracted as I'm looking this thing up. But there's a couple of things that are coming to mind for me at the same time. One is the tug of war. I'll call it a tug of war between comfort and niceness and like anger. And I would say that niceness is a tool of white supremacy, if I can sort of put it out there, like this idea that we should not rock the boat, that we should be nice, that we should be polite. Like even the idea of politeness often is a tool of white supremacy. Because in the face of injustice, we're expected to still be very nice and gentle, even when we might be literally dying in the streets. And so I definitely am a recovering people pleaser. Like that's definitely just part of my story and the work of knowing my default and choosing to press through that and really learning to embrace anger, learning to embrace, the dark side of the force, like having that level of seeing our anger as powerful, seeing our anger as sacred, even because it is a righteous anger. We should be angry about the injustices that are happening, whether they're small slights that we might experience or big, giant, major things that impact millions of people. That's an appropriate response, right? But we're sort of socialized to think that the only path to justice is to be very gentle and nice and polite. And it's very much a bastardization of nonviolent resistance movements, like Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, like very much a whitewashing and an overrepresentation of that type of resistance. And then we completely ignore, like Malcolm X does not get the shine that he should get. The Black Panther Party is literally the propaganda, against the Black Panther Party and what they did. People will characterize them as, oh, that's the black version of the KKK. No, the hell no, they were not. They were community caretakers, creating programs, dealing with all kinds of symptoms of homelessness, food programs, and also self-defense. So just the ways in which stories get twisted. And again, it's a lot of propaganda that's intended to keep us in a certain type of mentality. And then just this idea of comfort. So the resource I'm going to shout out, there's a great article by a lady named Jen Willsey. Last name is Willsea. And she has an article called Got Internalized White Superiority, the Danger of Denial and the Promise of Another Way. And so she lists these different examples of internalized white superiority. And right to comfort is one of those things. So this idea that if you are bringing up a race conversation and it's making white folks uncomfortable, they will bristle at that. And then there will be sort of a turnaround that you are doing something wrong because you are the source of this discomfort. And so, like, talking about injustice should just be feel good and fuzzy when it's not.
Yep.
So that's kind of one category, one area that I'll talk about and name. And then just again, me as someone who is so intentional in my work with my emotions and feelings and empathy. It's heartbreaking to have these conversations with people we care about and love. And then we find out that they really and truly don't give a shit. Maybe, intellectually, they may profess certain values, but then when you talk about your pain in your heart, they don't care. And just, even the type of person, when you're talking about justice, to play devil's advocate, that's horrible. The devil does not need why would you choose to advocate for the devil? I think it's the same energy, when you see these horrific stories about like Diddy, for example, in the news. Like, are you going to play Diddy's advocate? Like, really? Like that's devil's advocate, like just this horrendous stuff that this person has done.
I know. Sometimes I'm envious of the devil. I'm like, can I just be? I wish I was the devil because I'd have so many advocates.
You'd have so many advocates. Like you would win U.S. presidential election. Anyway. And so, it can be this heartbreaking experience of sometimes we have people we love and care for, and then we're seeing them for the first time in a particular way. And then we have to decide for ourselves, like, whoa, what do I do with this information when I've really shared my heart and my passion? And their response is defensiveness, or they're gaslighting me. No, that's not what it was. You're being too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. They're a good person. Like, they don't believe you. They don't trust that you are knowing what you're talking about from your own lived experience. And then we sometimes have to make really, really hard choices and decisions about that. Two of the groomsmen in my wedding, I have completely blocked and I don't talk to anymore because, as they learned of my work and as I got more vocal about racism and anti-Blackness, they did not respond well to that. And so it's heartbreaking that sometimes we find ourselves in those spaces. And then it's a thought pattern of what does it look like, which is a whole other tricky, challenging conversation to be, adults in our 40s having to figure out what does new community look like? What do new friendships look like? And how can I have that sense of vetting to make sure that we're truly on the same page about things that really, really fucking matter in our lives. And then also finding community that looks more like us, or at least has a sense of lived experience where we don't have to do all of the explaining and the teaching. That's been again, I'll say the last few months, especially for me, I've had to do a lot of intentional work to locate friendship and community and connection. And it's been amazing. It's been a glorious process and experience of doing that. But I haven't really prioritized that over several years. And I've felt that, like I can feel the loneliness of that. And so there are people out here that also have that same feeling in that sense and just needs somebody to, be that first voice of, hey, anybody else like me feeling this too? Like, can we get together?
Yeah.
And then you'll be surprised at other people that say, yeah, me too. I want to connect. Let's talk. Let's hang out. Let's, get a Zoom, whatever that might be.
Totally. I relate to this so much. And it's the more we talk about it, the more we realize, okay, for me, I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people in this, like you said, the boat that we don't want to rock. And we're rocking it. And what I appreciate about it too is like, yeah, my late 40s, I'm meeting all these new people. Even through having this podcast, there's people from around the world that will message and we'll have these insightful conversations in the background. And I'm like, oh my God, you're going through this ism too. And the care and the excitement of that. I think the hard part, like you said, the disheartening part is the people that you thought knew you so well that were in the circle. You can't, I'm like, why can't I sit down and have this kind of conversation, with this friend I've had for 100 years? But then you start to realize, some of it is like, did I lead them on too? And then the other part is like you've been saying, it's blocked and not all people are going to get there, which is the other part of this. I don't know if you've experienced or the people that you've been talking to in your community, but when you do start to get there and go on this journey, I often hear is like, whoa, you're 16,000 miles ahead, slow down, be patient. I'm trying to catch up to you. And I'm going to out myself here because in the beginning, I'm like, holy crap. Yes, I'll back it up. I'll pause. But I guess where I'm at now is like, I don't feel like I could be like, again, friends with the gang. And I decide I don't want to take those drugs. And then the friends are, well, just give me a minute. Like, come on. And then I'm like, okay, I'll just have one drug right now. I know that sounds silly by saying one marijuana, please, or whatever. But it's the analogy, of like, wait, no, I can't be around that because if I go, like a drug addict that would put themselves in that environment, it would be very easy to fall back into it. And that's how I feel is if I put myself back into that environment, I know that I won't be able to challenge, I won't be able to say, I won't be able to do because we've had this, years and years of this kind of relationship. So I don't know if you have any advice or tips or those of us that get told often, you're so far into this journey, slow down. It's hard to slow down and I don't want to slow down. Should I be more patient? Like, how can I be more helpful and patient for those that are trying to catch up and run so fast?
I mean, yeah, I hear you. For me, at least, I am pretty particular in terms of who my kind of quote unquote audience is, in terms of what my speaking is for. Whether that be on a broad platform like social media or whether it be on a one-on-one conversation. And I think when we can tighten up in terms of who do we want to have these types of conversations with, it really does a lot of work to really eliminate some of those types of pushback. Because for me, my quote unquote audience are people who are ready. Like they understand that this is important, that this is real, that this is urgent, and we need to get off our ass and do something about it. And I wouldn't say that my audience are people who are that tentative, or even people that are maybe not sure all the way if this is even real or legit. And maybe, again, they're playing devil's advocate and they're pushing back. What about this? Like, there are people who are phenomenal justice evangelists. We'll put it like they're converting, they're making converts out there. That is not a lane that I choose to be in. There may be times where maybe an organization will hire me and they'll want me to do something that's very introductory, and I'm happy to do that in like a group setting. But I'm not interested in dedicating my focused time to converting people over on an individual basis, because you're moving too fast has been a pushback since justice work existed, which means since there was injustice in the world, which means since we evolved into humans.
Right, yeah.
So we're always moving too fast. And I'm thinking of, there's like a really, really particular meme that I'm thinking of that's basically like showing somebody slowly like drowning in water. And then in the last slide, it's just their hand up and somebody giving them a high five, like instead of pulling them out of the water. And that's sort of the energy is like, we're literally drowning. And then you are saying that it's too fast for you. So like, what are we talking about? Why are we prioritizing, again, your comforts when I am drowning? And so sometimes it can be helpful to, I guess, depending on who the person is and what their identity situation is. But sometimes it's a flip of the script that can get them to think about it differently. And so like I shared a social media post a couple of months ago where I was really talking about the need for white folks to prioritize talking to white folks about this stuff and to not get overly hung up on their desire to correct people of color. When it's like, before you even think about that, how are you engaging with your own community? Because a lot of y'all are not. And that's a suspicious energy to want to correct people of color about race when you're not even correcting people in your household about race. And then my example was talking about with women. Like, what if I, as a man, came into a primarily woman space asking, what about when women are upholding the patriarchy? How do I tell them about themselves? I think women will be like, fuck out of here. What do you mean? Like, tell your dudes that first. And I think that example was really helpful in that space where lots of people were like, oh, you giving that example really drove it home. So sometimes when we're having individual conversations, that can be a helpful reframe if they themselves possess an identity that experiences marginalization. Like, how would you feel if, I said you are going too fast when you're talking about your experience of being queer and the oppression that you experience? And I'm like, whoa, that's too much. Like, how would you feel about that? Or, how would you feel about that if I, whatever the conversation might be. Sometimes that reframe can cause people to say, oh, yep, I hadn't thought about it like that. That's a really good point. I need to, rethink on how I am responding to that.
That's so well said. Just like taking a second to process. That's so well said. Man, I love this. What I'd like to wrap up with is, if you could give us listening, watching, whoever's here today, one piece of advice about this journey and the work that, we're all doing or not doing or should be doing, whatever space we're all in, what would that one piece of advice be for all of us?
Yeah. So I think what's coming to mind for me right now is watch out and be mindful of I feel like there's a thin line between responsibility and accountability and wanting to do better and wanting to learn and shame for all of us. And I think like I've had a lot of interactions and heard from a lot of voices of people, period, especially white folks that feel a lot of shame and then feel like they're really shitty people because of, their whiteness and their complicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, that is just not a great place to be doing the work from. It's very disempowering. It's very, it can be overly self-focused. And I think most of all, it's just that it's disempowering. Yes. Like when we think of people who are blatantly excited about oppression and they're shameless about their racism, their sexism, their et cetera, there is no level of shame ever. I've never seen shame in that. There's a lot of empowerment and excitement and passion and enthusiasm. And then shit is happening and getting moved forward. And, the US is a whole hot mess right now, with people shamelessly excited about bigotry and oppression and discrimination. And then we, on the other side, we're very sort of tentative and, I don't know. And I feel so much shame. And so when you just think about those energies colliding, that kind of weakened energy is never going to be victorious. Yes. So how can we, own our shit, name it, say, you know what? I really wish my journey had been different prior to today. I don't have a time machine, but I can change and transform and control what I do going forward. And I'm actually going to take my negative feelings about my past experiences as a way of not ever going back there again. Like, I don't want to feel that way again. I'm not going to repeat that again. I'm going to move in this way instead, and let that be your fuel to keep us on track. And then, what happens when we have that level of confidence and boldness and just that level of commitments to this is so important to me that it has to be how I live my life forever. And, learning to get our voice and learning to, identify bullshit as it's coming out from somebody. And then, learning our tools on how to respond. And, that's some of the stuff that I teach as well. Is when somebody says a thing, how do we navigate that? Should we just embarrass them and call them out? Does it make more sense to more strategically pull them aside and explain a thing? Which I think both of those are very valid response strategies that, we can learn and then be able to pull them out depending on what's most appropriate. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest thing is how can we own our shit and then move into advocacy from a place of empowerment and confidence and community.
Yeah, that's well said. Really well said. Because there is a lot of that, like, I don't know what to say, or I feel, like, can't say anything. And so I think that's a really good point is like, start there and like, ask yourself about that, address that, because it's not easy for the person sharing the information with you. It's not easy for you processing it. So start exactly where you are and work from there. And I love that. Is there anything that you wish I had asked today or that you want to go back, add, or clarify?
I don't think so. I feel like we've had a really good conversation, and I feel like I've been able to articulate the stuff that I wanted to share. So I don't think so. I'm feeling pretty good.
Good. I feel good too. Okay. So quick middle fingers up. If there's something that you would put your middle fingers up to today, lighthearted, whatever, maybe not lighthearted, however you want it to be, what would it be?
Yeah. I rarely get petty, but I'm going to get a little petty now. I'm going to say middle fingers up to people who very joyfully and enthusiastically voted for Trump and now are getting completely screwed over by Trump policies immediately. And shout out to Francesca Ramsey and her incredible song about leopards eating faces. And then people, that chose to be in the company of leopards and then are surprised that their faces are getting eaten off by leopards. So shout out to Francesca Ramsey and her amazing work and her song. And it's like a whole vibe out here.
Oh, I'm going to totally check that out. Totally. Okay. So if people want to get in touch with you, because you offer programming, I sent my sister the trip that's coming up. I was like, oh, we're a little late, but we should do the sisters trip. You go to organizations, you do I have a friend that, told me she subscribes to you. She's learning so much from you. So how do people get in touch with you and what can they expect?
Yeah, I've got a lot of stuff going on. The best way to see my stuff is definitely Instagram at Racial Equity Insights. For people who are looking for like trainings, workshops, coaching, strategy work from an organizational level, email is great. info@racialequityinsights.com. And I've got e-courses. I do live classes. I have a handbook that is almost done that'll be coming out. I've got some they're called legacy trips, where they're trips we're going to be going to the South and we're going to be learning all about civil rights history. And we're going to be doing this together in person. It's going to be awesome. And then also I've got some classes that I'm doing with Tina Strawn, who's the author of Are We Free Yet? Black Queer Guide to Divorcing America. And we're doing some classes on how to leave the US, which, by the way, for the Canada audience will be also very, very applicable for people who are just wanting to leave the Western world and wanting to have different experiences of liberation in places that don't have those same things going on. So that's kind of at least most of the summary of stuff I got cooking right now.
It's amazing. I just want to thank you again. I want to thank you for my therapy session. I want to thank you for your time. You send me things like, hey, you could really benefit from this. Thank you for thinking of me. You have a lot going on. And I pass that along. Like, I appreciate that. I hope this is like not the end. We can have more conversations together. And for people listening, these conversations, we always say, are door openers. We're just starting them. We're just scratching the surface. So if you want to be part of this, you want to add on, you want to have more conversations like this, you know where to find us, reach out. We really appreciate those of you that have been messaging so much lately and saying that you want to add on to a lot of the Angry Brown Girl Club conversations. All of that is helpful because we're building our own data or we're doing our own research when we have these kinds of conversations. So I want to thank everyone who continues to support us and allow us to have these sorts of conversations. So thank you again, Tony, for your time. I really, really admire you and everything you're doing. And just know that there's so many of us every day that are like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. So please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kieran. Again, it's been a joy to be here. Absolutely. Let's do this again. And thanks again for having me.